I would now like to invite Mr. Shannon Stowell. Mr. Shannon Stowell has spent time in various countries around the world, including Taiwan, South Africa, Hong Kong, Japan, Brazil, and Mexico. He has over 17 years of business experience, marketing insight, and a vision and strong passion for adventure travel. Mr. Shannon Stowell holds a degree in biology from Seattle Pacific University. He is currently the president of the Adventure Travel and Trade Association. Can you please join me in a warm welcome to Mr. Shannon Stowell?
Well, welcome back from lunch. Hope it went well. Hope you're not sleepy from it. I'll try to keep you awake. So, my name is Shannon. I'm with the Adventure Travel Trade Association. It's a private organization of almost 900 companies and governments. We have about 20 federal governments and then about 50 provincial, state, and regional governments that are members of our association, in addition to about 600 tour operators and then about 200 other organizations that range everywhere from outdoor gear to insurance to technology, anything that touches the business of adventure travel, media, etc. So essentially what our organization is a home and a hub for the adventure travel industry globally. So I was asked to come and talk a little bit today about tourism for the future and what's happening right now in tourism. I understand that you've heard a lot of great speakers already on, especially from country perspectives on tourism. And so I'm going to give you a slightly different angle on that, and that's the global view on adventure tourism and why it matters. So one of the things that I'd like to do is describe adventure travel for you briefly, because everybody has a slightly different definition of what adventure is. And we did a lot of consumer research and found that there were three main pillars that emerged from conversations with people that consider themselves adventure travelers. One is some sort of physical activity. The second would be connection to nature, and the third would be a cultural immersion. So when you put those three aspects together in travel, that's the core of adventure tourism. It can be soft, you can have a 5-star luxury African safari, or it can be extremely rigorous. You can go to the North Pole on a dog sled. So adventure tourism is incredibly diverse, and you've got everything from $10,000 to $30,000 US trips to $20 per day, almost self-guided type experiences. So it's a huge range. Some of the facts about our organization is that we serve as a kind of a business hub and center for the adventure industry. And I have to make a quick side note. It's a little weird for me to wear a tie. I have to admit, I haven't worn one in about a year. So if I seem a little uncomfortable, we're in the adventure industry. We obviously focus a lot more on the casual and leisure side of the business. So what I'd like to do first is show a video.
Well, I think tourism is all about adventure, isn't it? I mean, the definition is quite encompassing, all of that. Travel must be an experience, one that you add something to your own self after. Mm-hmm. And that's what adventure is all about.
Absolutely. We had a speaker back in 2005 and 6. He was an absolute favorite, Thornton May, a futurist, very humorous. So you've heard him before.
Yes, I do.
So he weaves a lot of humor in with also telling the as much as he can about the future. And he said to our audience back in 2005 or 6 that the future of travel is adventure travel. What do you think about that statement?
No, I think we said it this morning, both you and I. The reason why I'm here, the reason why we need to work together, is that adventure tourism is what tourism should be today, and it's definitely what tourism will be tomorrow. And that's why we might as well start shaping it together, putting the boundaries for it, setting the guidelines, and making the vision clearer and crisper.
What makes you say that that's the way it should be? I'm curious.
Because the old way of doing travel and doing business, these masses moving aimlessly and without a purpose, and just, yesterday, for example, when we heard our friends from Switzerland saying that there are two ways you can travel: a trip that you remember and a trip that you want to forget, or you've traveled to forget, or you've traveled to remember. I think we belong to the first part, which is basically something, when you say remember, it's adding to yourself. So it is the future of travel, without doubt. It is adventure travel.
I agree. I feel like even though it is, if you put it into a slice and a segment, you could look at it and say it's not the biggest piece of travel today, but it's one that the people who operate it are on the front lines. And so they know that if they don't protect their local wildlife, if they don't protect the environment, the local cultures, make sure that the local people are involved and benefiting from it, then their business is gone. And in my mind, that's when destinations lose their unique gems. And from all the research we see and what we see happening, it seems from our perspective, and I would love to hear yours, that the customer is now not only asking for but demanding authentic experiences.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we also touched on it today as well. Adventure tourism is probably one of the most responsible modes and norms of tourism, because we understand exactly that our natural capital is the environment and the culture, and you don't consume your capital. No business does that. Mm-hmm. It's real business. It's real sound business, but it's a good thing to do as well. And you're absolutely correct in the sense that the operators in this field are pushing the concept of travel and tourism to the limits and to the boundaries of where it should be, and taking a pioneering lead in this.
So when he said this, we were all shocked that he would say that adventure travel was the future of travel. I'm just going to close this. Is that okay? Or, oh, okay. Yeah, I'll just put our website up there and can talk a little bit more about that later. The fact that the UN Secretary General of Tourism sees adventure tourism as the way of the future was a shocker for all of us. We couldn't believe it when he said it. And it was interesting too, because as we worked in Mexico over the last couple of years, President Calderon actually took the issue of adventure travel as his own personal mission to change tourism in Mexico. So President Calderon opened our event in Mexico and then put his blessing on numerous events that we did thereafter, which aligned the whole Mexican tourism industry to pay attention to adventure travel. And Mexico is a place that, for example, has a lot of tourism, but it also has some problems with being viewed as not only a dangerous destination, but also sometimes just sun and beach and cheap. And this is not the true story of Mexico. So we've been using adventure tourism to tell more of the story. So you've probably heard this figure that tourism contributes 10% of all global GDP. It's something like 12% of all jobs on the planet now. 1 billion people traveled internationally this year. It's the first time it's ever happened. So it's a serious industry. It often does not get taken seriously. If you look at who ends up getting put to the back of agendas many times, it's tourism, because other industries are more hard industries, easy to define, to identify. Tourism touches so many pieces. It has a big ripple effect, but it often is not taken seriously. I am not a full advocate for tourism. I think the longer I'm in tourism, the more that I see some of the damage that it does and the problems that we as tourists cause. Environmental degradation, habitat loss, wildlife destruction, cultural erosion, child sex tourism. Unbelievable subject. We covered this at the ITB yesterday. Just as a little snapshot, we had one hotelier who has they've signed a program as well as we have called thekode.org. Has the code been brought up at all here at this? No. Okay. So the code is a child protection program. It deals with child sex tourism and trafficking, the issues there. One hotelier who has 1,100 hotels said, if you think that this is not a real issue, one hotel in Sweden, this is just one tiny snapshot, a hotel in Sweden gets several attempts a day to access child porn through our network every day, every year. One hotel, we have 1,100 hotels, and we're one tiny hotel chain. Said that the problem is absolutely massive. And in many cases, it's tourists that are doing this. Economic problems. There was a study done recently that said that something like only 10% of the revenue that comes from resorts, for example, stays in the country. The rest goes back to New York, Hong Kong, Singapore. It does not stay with the locals. The argument is that the locals get jobs. Well, they get to be maids, they get to clean rooms. In many cases, mass tourism is just destructive to a culture, to a society. And so I am not an advocate for mass tourism. We are not. We think that tourism needs to start being done better and more responsibly. And this is one of the reasons that we exist as the ATTA. This is our push, and we just assume this as part of doing business now. We just released a values statement to our membership, so you can't join the ATTA anymore unless you first agree with the values statement, and it addresses all these issues that I just brought up. For us, it's a barrier for business. It actually might hurt our business a little bit, but we feel like it is so important that if we don't wake up to some of the issues that the world is facing, we're not going to be able to recover from some of them. Global warming, for example. So good news, what is the good news? There is general awareness increasing. This year was the 5th year that ITB, the big event, had Corporate Social Responsibility Day, and the room was jammed every single session, except for a couple that were at lunch hour. But it was probably between 200 and 400 people per session at these events. 5 years ago, it didn't even exist. So, and then it started in a pub, a small group starting to talk about the issues. So there is a general awareness, and companies are getting engaged. And then there's also good organizations that are starting to really take things seriously. The Global Sustainable Tourism Council is an organization that has studied the world's tourism standards. So you've probably heard of Green Globe, EarthCheck, all these different certification systems. There's about 150 of them around the world. So the Global Sustainable Tourism Council studied the criteria for all these issues. They actually went through 8,000 criteria pieces and boiled it down to 37 that seem to be the keys for managing tourism well. Those are broken down into 4 basic categories. First is companies need to demonstrate effective sustainable management. Secondly, they need to maximize the social and economic benefits to the local community and minimize the negative impacts. Third is maximizing benefits to cultural heritage and minimizing negative impacts. And fourth is maximizing benefits to the environment and minimizing negative impacts. So it seems pretty basic, but this lines out 37 points that companies can focus on. They actually have criteria for destinations and also for tour operators. So these are good signs. The code, the fact that this organization now exists, and major companies are getting involved in it. A lot of companies don't get involved in it because it's an uncomfortable subject. So there's only one airline signed up from the entire planet. But there are more and more major hotel chains. Accor Hotels, for example, has signed up to be a part of the code. So there's a lot of activity happening right now, which is really good news. So where adventure tourism fits into all this is that in the global economy of tourism, adventure, even in 2007, only about 40% of tourism boards viewed adventure as its own segment. So a minority even recognized it. We worked with 100 tourism boards and did a survey and found that 5 years later, so last year, 2012, more than 80% consider adventure tourism to be its own sector now, and now are supporting it. So it's grown dramatically in the tourism board world. But also the consumers, it is absolutely exploding. In fact, we just got data, we have not released it yet because we want to make sure that it's actually real, is showing that adventure tourism is growing at almost 50% per year right now. The numbers are so much higher than we could have anticipated. And I think that's because customers are starting to see that mass tourism, just going in to Vegas, I'm using US examples here, but Vegas and Disney World and New York, everybody's kind of done that now, and they want vacations that are meaningful, they're transformative, they want to meet local people, they want to understand They want to have a much better experience that transforms them. So we see this growing radically. The size of the adventure industry estimated right now is about 200 billion, and that's all international, outbound. So that doesn't even count within countries when people go to do adventure sorts of trips. So we don't measure that. We're measuring international outbound. The tourism industry is starting to pay more attention. I keep using Mexico as an example just because we've gotten really deep in Mexico, so we understand it a lot better now. One of the classic problems that destinations have is that the mass tourism interests have most of the government's attention, which is understandable. That's where the money is, right? So in Mexico, for example, it's sun and beach. The sun and beach resorts and that industry, that's where the marketing comes from. Everything, the money comes from them, and all the message goes there. And so the adventure and eco sector often tend to get ignored. But we're starting to make a difference because we can now show facts and figures. The average customer spends about $3,000 on an adventure trip. This is high for an average spend. And that's about a 7-day overnight stay. So it's not what a lot of governments still consider adventure backpacking to be hippies who are bungee jumping. In fact, many times I'll say I'm with the Adventure Travel Trade Association, and people will say, "Oh yeah, my nephew bungee jumps." I say, "No, it's a much bigger story than that. It's a real sector of the business, and it's part of the reason that it is considered such a force, and the fact that Telebrify noticed it is that because people are selling these companies are selling culture experiences, they're selling nature. Wildlife, you're having these experiences. These are the people who are very aware and very engaged in protecting these species and these environments and local cultures. So ironically, it may be tourism that saves the Michoacan butterfly or the Rwandan gorilla or the Indian tiger. In many cases, for example, one of my friends who works heavily in tiger tourism protection in India said that where you don't have tourists, you don't have tigers, because habitat gets eroded, because poaching occurs, because no eyes are on the tigers. So ironically now, it is the tourism industry that is both the biggest threat to some of these things and is also potentially the biggest protector. So that's where I think tourism needs to change. I had breakfast with Telebrify the morning that we did this interview. And he said, "I'm not going to say this from stage because obviously I represent the entire tourism industry, but the old ways of doing tourism don't work anymore." And then he did say it from stage anyway. You heard it on the video. And then he did it as well from stage. So it's still a very sensitive subject. Our goal at the ATTA is to work with other organizations, to do our own work, but then also work with other organizations to try to help the mass tourism industry change. We don't think it's all bad. Some economies are 80% dependent on tourism. 80% of their income comes from tourism. It's incredible. It's so important, and you can't just take it away. But we do need to change it and shift it towards being a protective force rather than a destructive force. And if you think about the fact that we had 1 billion travelers internationally this last year, and China and India have yet to unleash the middle-class traveler on the planet. That is going to be a huge change in how tourism works. It's going to be very different. It's going to be super high volume. So our hope and our encouragement to those of you who are thinking of getting into the tourism industry is go in with this mindset of how can you help change the way that the mindset currently works? How can we make the future sustainable and something that is good for the generations to come? So I'm going to conclude there, and if you have questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them, especially in regards to adventure tourism, but also we deal with tourism in general. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those.
Thank you, Mr. Stowell. That was a very interesting presentation. We can take questions now.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. My name is Kade, and I'm a master's student here at the ICD. I'm really glad you brought up the topic of Mexico. I'm from the United States. I'm from Iowa, and I remember 2 years ago, right before spring break, it's about a month beforehand, which spring break right now actually in the United States, but there was an announcement at my university on the news channels to not travel to Mexico. And first up, I thought about that, and of course, then I was like, wait, I'm not going to Mexico. Of course, news says not to go, I'm not going to go. And I was thinking, I'm like, how is this even legal for some guys in suits in the U.S. or like, newsroom saying don't go there? Like, it costs Mexico probably millions of dollars, maybe even more. And what can Mexico do to communicate to them to avoid this problem or this issue? Because it seems to happen quite a lot. And I don't know if you ever you said you worked with them, so I wonder what's the process of that. So.
Yeah, it's a great question. You caught exactly what the problem was, which was the Texas Department of Public Safety issued the warning. And then what happened was when the state makes that announcement, it rolled into universities who then canceled their student programs to go to Mexico. Insurance companies then said, we're not gonna insure anybody who goes to Mexico. So then more people say, well, then we're not gonna take people to Mexico because we're no longer insured. It had a huge rolling effect. And so the CEO of the Mexico Tourism Board, I saw him at an event and we were bemoaning this issue. And he said, well, we're gonna go and meet with the Texas Department of Public Safety. Will you go with us? So I flew down, met with them. We also got several large airlines to go and the 4 largest associations in the United States. So ASTA, the American Society of Travel Agents, USTOA, and NTA, actually the 3 of them and us. I got their presidents to all sign basically a petition against it. And so we came in with all the industry, both United States and Mexican, and just said, this is absolutely unfair. Because the wording of this, I know this because I've seen it so many times, the wording was, if you want to stay alive this spring break, don't go to Mexico. It was insane. It was completely inappropriate. So we went in, we were very diplomatic and said, will you be precise? If you're going to do travel warnings, be precise. Say, don't go to Ciudad Juarez, okay? Don't go to these border cities. Don't go to this state. But don't say don't go to Mexico. That hurts. And we took the angle of it hurts American business because they don't care about Mexico is the bottom line. Obviously, we do care about Mexico. But we went in with that angle to say this hurts us, this hurts our partners, it's unfair, and it's not true. And they basically said, we'll take it under consideration. The next spring break, they did a release a year later, and it was precise. So they did go to specific locations that they said we don't want American citizens to travel here. But then recently, 4th of July, I think it was this year, they did another general travel warning. So we're dealing with politicians who don't actually care. That was the process with that. We actually also went to Egypt right after the uprising, and we were there about 2 months afterwards because the tourism industry fell by 80%. So tourism businesses in Egypt were just shattered. In an already difficult economy, you take away 80% of somebody's business and it's game over. So we went, again, it was the 4 presidents of the associations who went, assessed it, and we came back to our members and said, it's safe, things are under control. And we met with the US ambassador and we asked her to Egypt and asked her to ask the State Department to change from a travel warning to a travel advisory, which is, brings it down a notch. CNN reported on us being there, and they said ATTA, and NTA, all these associations, meet with the ambassador, and then they showed a picture of Tahrir Square. It would take me a while to find it. I can show you afterwards if you want to see it. We were at Tahrir Square. It was sunny, it was clean, it was empty. There was a gardener watering the grass. There were maybe 20 people there. CNN used the image from the uprising with the tanks and guys with guns as the image for our story. Yeah, I can show it to you. It's an incredible misuse. So tourism, this just shows how often the media misuses a situation to sell papers or sell ads. So.
Okay, first of all, thank you for an interesting presentation. My name is Olli Suominen. I'm a MA student here also at the ICD.
Great.
Now, you already mentioned in your presentation China and India.
Mm-hmm.
I guess everybody's heard the saying that what if all the Chinese would have a car? Now, having lived in China, I've noticed that the Chinese tourist industry is still very much based on the mass tourist concept. Now, are you doing something to address the problems that what if, I mean, when the middle classes get richer and they will have more money to use on tourism, on travel, then how would it be possible to make them basically skip the mass tourism and go right into adventure tourism, which would be more environmentally sustainable? Sure.
Well, I mean, the issue is people are going to travel how they want to. So if they want to go to New York or Vegas, that's what they're going to do. So as far as how do we address it, our goal is actually in that case, we are encouraging organizations to become sustainable no matter what business they're in. If it's a bus, if it's a tour company, if it's a hotel, everybody should be about the business of sustainability now. Our future depends on it, not just tourism's, but our future as a race depends on it. There's not a whole lot we can do about it. People will do what they want to do. We're growing the industry is growing as fast as it can and offering things that hopefully every customer will want and be sustainable, but there's no way to control it. Our encouragement to sensitive destinations is we're saying, please plan now for massive volume. So if that means, in some cases, very simply raising the prices, to see the gorillas in Rwanda, it's $750 to get into the park. That's the park fee. Very high. You could argue that keeps too many people out, but that's kind of the point, is to make sure, because it can't sustain, the carrying capacity is so low for some of these destinations. So some of it will be price oriented. In other cases, destinations, and we see some destinations doing this, working on trying to spread their tourism out, which is also helpful. Because if you're at a small eco lodge versus, building more and more mega hotels, this is obviously better in most cases. So, sort of a long answer, but that's the unavoidable situation right now.
One final question.
Hey everyone, my name is Chris Castro. We actually just got in today from Miami, so thank you for the presentation. I'm with an organization called Ideas for Us, and one thing that is beginning to kind of pick up is immersion trips, basically educational programs for students. You go to various different places, learn about their culture, learn about sustainability in different ways, Costa Rica being a big one. How do you see these educational immersion trips playing a role in kind of the growth of the travel agencies and these trade associations?
It's a huge part of it. It's actually kind of part of the core of adventure tourism is immersing people in the cultures.
Sure.
So it's a part of it. I think it's fantastic. I love it. Because the theory that we have, which I don't know that we even have to prove it, is that when people do these trips and genuinely meet other cultures, they are transformed in some way. They become some sort of advocate for that destination, for that people group, for the wildlife. They go back and they tell their friends. Amazing. They may donate. They may get involved in organizations that help support. So immersive travel changes people.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. So can we please have a second round of applause for Mr. Stowell?
Thank you. My pleasure.